Welcome to the latest episode of Authenticated with your host, Kate McLeod. I am intrigued by people. People watching, I love. People learning, that's where I'm insatiably curious. I'm interested in the why and how of the creative mind's pattern of thinking, the subtext to the creative thinker, or in its more conscious and malleable form, the creative conscious. Because when you are so clear on yourself via the triad of consciousnesses, then you become reflective to others. Meeting yourself is an infectious practice because what feels good is infectious and something I think we could all use a good dose of. So join me in conversations with a diverse arsenal of creative thinkers, from artists to entrepreneurs to serial thinkers ready to optimize their creative conscious. With me, self-made and self-proclaimed creative entrepreneur. Sounds hot, right? Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
This is Vincent Hooper. Vincent is currently playing Simba on Broadway.
I am.
You are. How is that going?
It's wild. You know, I've told a lot of friends that this experience with Lion King has really reminded me why what we do is so important. Because it's like I just meet so many people who like come and see the show, and like there was this one woman fairly recently. Afterwards, I ended up being outside at stage door or whatever, and like most everyone had gone, but she and her family stopped me. She was like, "I'm so sorry. I know this is just like a typical Wednesday for you, but I've always dreamed of seeing a show in New York." And she was like, "This is a core memory." And like my kids, like this is their first time seeing a show. And yeah, it was like that kind of thing where I'm like, "Oh, right. Like, oh, you come in, you do your thing, whatever. And it's a weekday for you. But for somebody else, it's like, oh, they've waited their entire life for these 2.5 hours.
And they're going to remember them too.
Yeah.
And I think what's so special about what you're doing right now, specifically in The Lion King, is you have so many kids there.
Yeah.
Does it ever feel a bit heavy, like what it is that you have on your shoulders in terms of authenticity? And like we've talked about this a bunch before, where you are displaying yourself publicly, you're sharing yourself with others so that they can have an experience. Your honesty translates to their honesty.
Yeah.
So these kids come and they see you. Like, does it ever feel a little heavy, what it is that you have?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it feels like a really big responsibility. At times, uncomfortable in a way, because it's like, you're sort of questioning, like, what do you see when you look at me? I guess it's a connected way, like, early on in the process, a lot of people had started throwing this word around, star. You know, like, oh, how does it feel to be a Broadway star? Or like, oh my gosh, you're such a star, da-da-da-da. And I found myself getting very uncomfortable because I was like, I'm not exactly sure what you mean when you say that.
Yeah.
Like, what is contained within the word star for you? And is that aligned, or does that resonate with who I'm trying to be in the world, or who I'm trying to be as an artist?
What you say too, like in the world, you say star. By literal definition, a star is like a huge thing,
like,
a gas very far away. And when someone's like, well, you're a star, it's like, well, no, I'm me. And I'm here, and for you to name something that is literally so far away from me.
Yeah.
I'm
it
just
creates
trying
a
to be
distance
here.
between us that I'm not interested in having.
Yeah, it means that you're no longer a human.
Yeah.
So that feels like it's not really actually an identity.
Yeah. It's not. But also, like, in that, I think I had to find some sense of acceptance that I'm like, oh, what if people are just allowed to perceive me in the way that they choose? If the only way that you can find to articulate that perception is by using a phrase like star, then I'm like, that's your bag.
Yeah.
I would describe myself as like a dude with a job. Mm-hmm. But cool. Like, you want to say star, you want to say whatever. It's like, that's all fine. That's all allowed to exist. And I think part of that was me coming to this place of allowing myself to be seen. And just letting that be and not shrinking it. Like, well, like, why? Or do I deserve it? Or like, what does this mean? It becomes this like existential thing.
Yeah, well, it's an offering. And we all have different conduits of communication. So you might call it star, but I just call it the human experience. Or I call it my authenticity. And once you give it, you have to let it go and be whatever it is going to be to someone else.
Yeah.
But I also feel like that is such a special thing about you as a human, is you're like, I'm a dude with a job. Yes, we are lucky to do what we love, but at the same time, we've chosen to do what we love and are actively choosing every single day. And it manifests in different ways for different artists, but to be able to just like, I'm going to come up here and perform, and this is my special gift that I'm offering. Like, please take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't work without them. There's a communal aspect of this. There's a exchange here to me, puts you on equal footing with me.
Yes.
There's not a level of like, well, you're on stage and you're, and I'm like, no. I mean, I understand where that comes from. Also, this is a joint effort. We can be up here telling a story, but there's no one to receive it. Then I'm like, it's kind of a vain effort. Especially like once we get outside and it's stage door and whatever, it's like, I don't know, like we can have a full conversation that doesn't need to be this like, oh, you're Simba.
Like, aren't we all Simba?
Yeah.
When you see little kids when you come out, does that like feed your soul?
It really does. I'm like, I've caught a number of kids outside, sometimes backstage, they're like having a tour, and I'll catch them doing the like lion pose, and I'm like, there was this one little girl. I think I was walking backstage to go give a tour or something, and she was back there with a different group, and I still had a bit of makeup on because we were in between shows that day, and she stopped in her tracks and was like, "Oh my gosh, is it really you?" I was like, "Hey, yeah, it's me." She's like, "Simba." I was like, it's just, it really, because kids don't lie. Part of why I think kids are amazing is because I'm like, they're so honest and they honor their experience of the world by naming it all the time.
Yep.
And so it's like, yeah, if they think you're dope, they're going to be like, yo, like, you're him. And there's no pretense about it. There's no sort of like trying to play it cool or whatever. Yeah, they'll fully stand in your face and like shakingly hand you a playbill and not break eye contact. And they're just like, oh my, I'm having this moment right now. Like,
but,
whoa.
like, there's something so special in that too, because I find like as an artist, and like you didn't finish school. No. We've talked about this a little bit too outside. Being an authentic artist as an adult means so much undoing, because you want to get back to that kid. You want to get back to that kid who's like, and like believes like this peanut butter sandwich also like lives in space, or like, whatever their little beautiful minds come up with. We want to get back to that place in a very curated way.
Yeah.
That's what we're going back to do. So it's like whenever I have an interaction with a kid, the things that they'd say, I'm like, man, I want that element, but just the fundamentals of that element. I don't need to be 6 ever again, nor do I ever need to be any age that I have already been ever again. I'm very happy where I am, but I definitely need that sense of insatiable curiosity, and I can be wherever I want, and everything that I want to happen will. And I feel like that's actually what the power of manifesting is, and that's what authenticity is getting back to that uninhibited self, where it's like, yes, we're all bundles of contradiction. Yes, nothing's going to make sense all the time, but it can if it just makes sense to us, and that's all that matters. Yeah. Like anytime that I have the chance to interact with like a small child, I think I try and make a conscious effort to allow their experience to be valid. So it's like, okay, like, yeah, if you feel like playing with dolls in this moment, or like whatever the way it is that I can yes what your instincts are, I'm like, yeah, let's do that, Because I don't want you to grow up and have to be like, oh, like, have to then do the work to rediscover those impulses. Yes.
It's like, oh no, the state of play is allowed to exist forever. We don't have to take ourselves so seriously.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, just let it can be loose. No one knows what they're doing. We're all making it up as we go along. Might as well use your imagination in the meantime.
And what a gift to give them too. And I like what you just said. No one knows what they're doing. And back to the school of it all, someone who overschooled themselves and like, seriously, I still am like in the process and will forever be in the process of undoing, because no one knows what they're doing, especially in this art. That's the beauty of it, but it's also the double-edged sword of it, where it's like no one knows what they're doing. And because we are full humans and we have to bring our full selves to our creativity, us bringing our full selves means all of our flaws too.
Yeah. I mean, because most of my friends did go to school. I feel like it's an interesting thing to watch people sort of try and figure out how much room their imperfections have or are allowed to have. That's what I think makes art exciting and interesting.
Yeah.
Is that I'm like, oh yeah, like we as humans are imperfect. So me watching someone on stage or screen be this like hyper polished perfect thing, I'm like, I can acknowledge it as impressive and also not relate to it.
Yes.
And because I'm like, well, that's not my experience. I don't think there's really any of our experience. Like, we have every moment planned to a T, and we know that. And like, now I'm like, no, like, let me see some mess a little bit. You know, let me see some smudges and some dings in there. And then that makes it feel that much more real and worth it being a live experience. So yeah, we're all here for this one performance right here, right now. Like, it might as well be a living, breathing thing.
Yeah.
As opposed to just like, and then I go cross stage right to, and then I turn this way and I gesture like this, and then I make sure I have my breathing here and to then sing the note. It's like, don't let me see the strings, you know, let me just
throw the homework away.
Yeah.
My clients and I talk a lot about this, about living in the gray versus the black and white, where everyone's like, well, we want to define something. So it's black or it's white. It's like, well, it's not actually. It can be multiple things at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, so outside of work, I'm curious just because artistry is the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like the outside too. So I don't want to call it off time, but I can't really think of a better term for it right now. What is your time not performing like for you to feed your artistic soul?
I feel like it's pretty low key in that I'm like, you know, part of it is sort of practices that help me maintain a certain level of mental balance. So it's like, you know, going to the gym, seeing friends, like having people over for dinner, making food. I mean, sometimes it's also just like tapping back into that kid of it all. I will spend hours playing a video game or like watching a cartoon or Disney Plus or something, you know, as embarrassed as I think a lot of us can be about, you know, it's like, oh, like, you know, I'm an adult now, so I shouldn't be whatever. It's like, no, but like, that is how I think I have found to keep the sense of play alive, is that I'm like, oh, being able to practice that in my daily life of like, yeah, freedom to you know, crack jokes with friends and while also finding the ways also to like stay grounded. I think it was Anna Devere Smith said in a talkback one time, she's incredible. She's like, yeah, acting is mostly a maintenance job. And I resonated with that so hard because I was like, oh yeah, like the bulk of what it is that we do, or like what is required to do what we do well, is like, yeah, like how have you, like, what have you been treating your body? What have you been putting in it? Like, have you been moving your body? You know, what is your soul being fed? Are you calling your parents, your grandparents? Are you spending time with a friend? Are you eating good? It's like that's that type of stuff that just feeds the soul and you know, gives you a wealth of lived experience. So then, yeah, when you do end up getting to the artistic part of it all, it's like, oh, you have somewhere to go and like things to mine, and it's not just like, oh, I woke up today and I read a book about acting, and then I went and saw a show, and then it's like everything is just somehow connected always to the thing that you're employed to do. Yeah,
that prescriptive nature of it all too. I think about that every single time I go in the equity building and I walk past the non-ec holding room. And I'm like, the jewel-toned dress, the character shoes, the stack of 4 plays next to you, like those people I want to go and hug.
Yeah, well, because I think there's a unfair pressure, I think, that we put on ourselves and each other, that there's a list of qualifications. Yeah. There's like, oh, if you don't tick all of these boxes, you're not really serious about the art.
Because there's a performative nature to it all.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't prove it to me. And if you're trying to prove it to me in your day-to-day, like outside, when you step on stage, you're still going to be trying to prove it to me.
Yeah.
So I love hearing that you're like, yeah, it's just as casual as like a guy with a job. Like I like have food with my friends. Like I go to the gym, like I take care of myself, and it's like maintaining like yourself the entire time.
Yeah. At the end of the day, like as much as we can feel intrinsically linked with our artistry, I'm like, at the end of the day, we're all people first. So I'm like, in order for the artistry to have any resonance, any depth, any, you know, spectrum of color, it's like I have to be a full human being. Anything that I'm, you know, trying to involve in my artistry, I'm like, I think in some ways needs to be a practice in life. So it's like, okay, like if you're trying to find out, it's like, oh, how do I do, you know, 8 shows a week and keep that up and maintain that? It's like, okay, well, how much consistency do you practice every day? You know,
that's
it's like, that kind of, you know, it's like if you're trying to find vulnerability and truth on stage or on screen, it's like, okay, well, how honest are you being in your interpersonal relationships?
Dude, the one thing I did take away so heavy from one of my professors in grad school was he was like, if you want to have a successful career, get your personal shit in order. And I was like, whatever. And but no, ever since, like, my friend Whitney talks about this, but there's like a quantum leap theory, right? Where as soon as you get your personal life in order, your finances, your interpersonal relationships, your romantic relationships, that is when your work can really skyrocket. Because it's like, unless your house is clean, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And like, yes, of course, there are like ebbs and flows to that. But I really feel like as far as like launching yourself, like that's what you have to be doing the work everywhere. You can't just expect the results in one place, but not be doing the work everywhere.
Yeah. Because otherwise you're trying to fabricate something that's not familiar to you, which like, obviously there's a degree to which sometimes we have to do that. Like, it's like, okay, if the character has a lived experience that is so far beyond yours, of course there's going to be some degree to which like you have to make that up. But in terms of sort of the foundational aspect of it, it's going to be really hard to be able to release into embodying the truth of a human experience if you in your personal life are like constantly sort of covering or masking or tucking things away or not engaging fully. I'm like, it's going to feel like a little bit of a block. You're going to always be a little concerned about like, what's that audience member thinking? What are they looking at? Or does my scene partner think I'm good?
Well, you said it. It's engagement. And also I feel like we're supposed to find ourselves, everybody, not just artists. Everyone should find themselves to be the most interesting person because you should be interested in yourself. And it's like, and if I think that I'm bomb.com, then like, so you don't like it? That's okay. Some people don't like me. And like, that's fine. I'm more interested in the people that like, that this does do something to you. When people talk about like, oh, it was bad. And I'm like, it was bad. Why was it bad? Well, it's just bad. Okay, but tell me why it was bad. Because I love bad art just as much as I love good art because I love being like, yeah, no, I don't like that. And guess what? I learned more about myself today because I don't like that. You know? But especially like for purposes of this show and consulting and stuff, when you're talking about your authentic self and being curious about yourself and finding more out about yourself, what is it that you want to take from what it is you're learning about yourself that you want to translate into your art? What is it that you want to give to the people that you are offering yourself as an example for?
What immediately came to mind was this idea that like there's no one way to do it. It's interesting. Like in the midst of the consistency I try and practice in my life, there's also a massive level of release I try and also cultivate. And so I think that in terms of there being no one way to do it, it's like, like being able to release into all the possibilities that there are. And that applies to your artistry, so like character choices and ways to approach a scene and whatever, as well as like the elements of yourself that seem contradictory. I can release into allowing all of those parts to exist. Then like in practicing that, then when I get on stage, I'm like, oh, I'm less concerned about being perceived and being seen because I'm like, I'm aware of all the things you could possibly see, and I've made my peace with all of them.
That is self-love.
Yeah, it's like, maybe you'll hate it. Maybe you'll be like, oh, that character is so this or so that, or maybe you'll love him and whatever. But it's like any sort of part of that spectrum that you can find yourself in, I'm like, that's fine. Yeah. That's okay.
See, okay, this is why conversations like this are so important because you're saying this and I'm like, oh my God, that's self-love. Also, what I'm hearing too is if you elicit a negative response from someone like, yeah, you don't like it. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. But you don't have to. I think that's more of like that offering itself is acceptance too. Just being like, yeah, but you're good the way you are. Yeah. And I'm good the way I am. Yeah. And like, that's just it.
Yeah. And that's like, that's the beautiful thing about us just being like human beings, right? Is that I'm like, oh, like the level of grace that you give to yourself to let yourself make mistakes, change your mind, sometimes be the worst, sometimes be the best. Like, it's like the whole thing. I'm like, oh, I think when someone engages with something that I do, a character or whatever, and they're like, oh, I felt negatively in some way about it. I think that actually kind of excites me because I'm like, yes, because in real life, we don't like everyone. I'm like, that is what it is to be human. So I'm like, if I'm doing my job correctly and making this character a fully fledged human being, it actually makes perfect sense that some of you out there will have differing opinions about who this person is and what you feel about them and whatever. Because I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to layer in the things that I experience in real life. Like playing a character like Hamilton, I'm like, I think that oftentimes the trap is to be like, well, he's the titular character, so like, let's make him heroic. And he's always just like upstanding, except for like when he cheats on his wife. Like, but I'm like, no. We can layer in throughout the entirety of this character. It's like, you can see the seedlings of his infidelity from the very beginning. You can see the areas in which he's a little misogynistic, in which he's a little arrogant and this and that. Like from the beginning. And it's like layering those things in. Yeah, some people in the audience are going to be like, I was with him, but like a little part of me was like, I didn't like that moment. It's like, yes, exactly. Because we're all allowed to have those moments. We're all allowed to be the ups and downs, the in-betweens, the gray.
Yeah. But also it's like, don't come in with that judgment of that person. That's the hard thing with direction, where it's like, yeah, but this result. And it's like, okay, calm down. Like the result will get there, believe me, because the writing already took care of that. Okay, there was infidelity. Well, history took care of that first. But it's there in the writing. It's like, it's going to be taken care of, but no one inherently believes that they're evil. And so let me be me, and it's going to happen, and they're going to be them. They're going to see it. Like, don't worry so much about it. The overall like self-love and acceptance to me just like makes everything more accessible. It makes you more accessible. It makes everyone else more accessible to themselves. And I think that is what intrinsically art is about being a human mirror. But to see yourself, but also allowing others to see each other, but you both exist in the same space. Yeah. And I think, when done well, it's a form of permission that like, when, that heroic character is allowed to exist across the full spectrum of what it is to be a person, I'm like, then it gives us permission to be like, I don't have to be perfect. Yes. To be someone worth looking up to or aspiring to or whatever it is. I'm allowed to like be more than just the narrow window. Well, it's also just believing you're of value. Like I think I was like 9 or something, and this has stuck with me forever, but my dad told me, I don't know what I said. I said something, and he looked at me and he goes, honey, he's like, if they could make a Kate pill, I would hope the world would get it. It's like, you just want to offer yourself. It's just like, no one has to be perfect. No one has to be any of the things that check the boxes. Just like be yourself, own who you are, and just like offer that. And like people take it or they don't. And like that's just kind of it at the end of the day. Yeah. So you know what you're serving. But where like what do you ultimately want as an artist? And like where do you want to go? I mean, I think I'm really interested in just doing more of that, more of like giving people permission to have grace, inviting empathy. I think that's why I'm like, I find myself drawn to, I don't know, projects that feel like they're about something or have something to say or like at least endeavor to that. And because I'm like, I think there's something really profound and necessary to being able to sit in a theater, like, would that be screen or stage, whatever, but like, and see a person, all their flaws, all their whatevers. And it's like, like I want to be a part of that shared space, that community that's like, what if we allow each other a bit more grace, just a bit more room to be flawed and to fail and to be, because I'm like, we all already have. I want to be a part of that. Yeah, the world needs that, like, desperately, which is, I think, why I started to fall into this line of work, too, where it's like, we need to be more authentic because we need to elicit authenticity in others. We have social media. We have immediate access to everyone and everything at all times. And so if that's going to be the case, then we have to evolve as humans to be more understanding, to embrace people for certain things. And it's just like everyone has an opinion now because they get to hide behind some, numerical, alphabetical, whatever of, a handle. They get to hide behind a million things. But it's because we don't have immediate access to human contact anymore, and now it's parasocial, everyone is under such high scrutiny all the time that it's almost changed our psychology as humans to think that we are really under that much scrutiny. When it's like, you put out a video online, or actually, no, you're releasing your EP.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the song you sent me,
Yeah.
first of all, was amazing.
Oh, thanks.
I was just like, I think I heard another part of you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I was like,
thanks.
whoa.
That's the hope.
And we're going to plug his EP in the show notes. But, you know, it's like you release that song.
Yeah.
That song goes out to, let's say, 1 million people, and 1 million people hear that. Versus a show, how big is the house?
1,700.
1,700. Yeah. Casual. But you know what I mean? But it's like you have that relationship every single night with 1,700 people, you know, plus anyone else who's working in the house or anyone else who's on stage. But do you find one scarier than the other?
I mean, I think just because I've done it longer, I find a safety in the theater because there's just a comfort there that I'm like, oh, I know enough of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah. Whereas with music, it's just newer. And I think it's an active engagement with the notion of vulnerability that I'm like, you know, because it's a vulnerable thing to put any sort of art out there, whether that be on stage performance or whatever. But I'm like, oh, to mine your heart and soul and experiences and put that into words and rhythm and melody, and to then share that with other people for them to have whatever experience they will of it.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, you know, I'm like, some of y'all maybe will be like, not a huge fan of his voice. Some of y'all will be like, like this song doesn't, whatever. Maybe it's too endearing. Maybe it's too this. Like, I'm like, there's so many versions of the thing. But also within that and in sort of coming to terms with that reality, I think I've just kind of accepted it. Like, I think that's why the project is called Tune In, is because that's what I had to do. Not only is it a housing for several songs, but I'm like, no, I had to, all throughout the process, like in writing the songs and now like producing them out and eventually releasing them, I'm like, all the voices, whether internal or external, that were like, oh, like, you know, I know that song might be a little too sweet, or like people maybe want something a little more cool and unaffected or sexy or da-da-da, or like, this is the way you have to do it, or like all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm like, I had to tune all of that out and just trust that my experience was valid and of value. And so, yeah, maybe, you know, some people are gonna wish this was just like more of a straight up like rap and R&B thing. And I'm like, that's fine. Some people are gonna be like, I wish this was covers of musical theater songs. I'm like, that's also fine. But someone out there is going to hear at least one of these songs and be like, that articulates the experience that I have had and have not been able to put into words. And so now I feel seen and like I'm not alone in this.
Yeah, it is going to do that, because when I heard the song, when you sent it to me, I immediately thought, this man shows up the same way everywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like, you are yourself. You are genuinely yourself. And sure, someone's seen you in musical theater and then they hear this. They're like, that is not the musical theater experience I was experiencing, because I expected this. And it's like, aren't you a little bit more excited that it's not? That he is an artist. He is all of these things there. It's such a special thing. And I think it's also very vulnerable to diversify, because people like black and white. They don't like gray. And it's like, no, being an artist now in this day and age, it's not to be the triple threat, because even that was like its own box to check. And it's like, now being the artist means to just be vulnerable, authentic, yourself, an example, to be seen, to be seen.
Yeah. As I mentioned in another podcast, actually, like, to be seen, and also to be seen trying, because you know, every swing is not a home run. Whether that be, again, like, you're making music, or you're on stage performing 8 times a week, or you're in a movie or a TV show. Not every swing is a home run. That could be an entire project. That could be a single take. It doesn't matter. But like, getting comfortable with that allows us to, again, like, cultivate that sense of play, give ourselves grace, like all of those things. It's like, and I'm allowed to try to do different stuff. Like, I know people are used to this thing, but I'm allowed to do this over here as well. Yeah, all the avenues are available.
I love that. To be seen, what? To be seen trying, because there is a finality in to be seen.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, then you expect a final product to be seen. It's not final, it's not finished. Like,
Yeah.
even a painting, it goes through wears and tears. Like, I'm sure every, visual medium artist is screaming at right now. Nothing ever feels finished. Cause like when I look back on like films I did years ago, or like a series I did years ago, or anything, and I look back at some final product, I look back, I'm like, ooh, she's had a glow up. She's had a glow up since. And someone references like, oh my God, I saw you in this. And I'm just like, no.
You didn't.
Because it's like to be seen doing this thing where it's like, it's active. It's just like, there is no finality in any art, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, because, I mean, again, like connecting the artist to the humanity, it's like, oh, you're constantly evolving as a person, hopefully, growing as a person. It would stand that your artistry is also going to continue to evolve in the same way.
Yeah.
Whether that's an active thing, if you, like taking class or whatever, or it's just now you've had a different set of experiences. And so that is unconsciously oftentimes affecting the way that you show up in a role, in a room, whatever.
Where does the stimulus for your growth come from? Does it come from like ruminating, reminiscing? Does it come from something that stretches you to move forward? Because like sometimes I can find myself listening to the same playlists over and over again, or sometimes I can find myself going back to the same show. Like people have the news on in their homes. Yeah. I have RuPaul's Drag Race on in my home at all times. But like, where do you find that growth for you happens?
I had a mentor growing up named Alan Robertson, and the thing he often said about, it was in relation to his kids, but I think knowing his heart that it really expanded out to the world at large, is just like wanting to leave the world better than you found it. And so I think that starts and continues on like an interpersonal level, on a personal level, really that, am I showing up as my best self? Or like, what room is there in the margins and the edges of who I am to like push a little further? It's like as we grow and have time to think about past decisions and, behaviors and things, it's like, okay, well, with that expanding awareness, there is homework as well of like, okay, like, yeah, I wish I could have shown up a little differently in that moment. So like, let me practice doing that. It's sort of like I want to be at service to the world in a way that is authentic and impactful. And if I'm not constantly checking back in with me, I'm like, I don't think I'll be able to really do that successfully. And I think also the more work I do on myself, it just opens up more sort of creative avenues of like, oh, now I just know myself better than I did 3 years ago. And so there are different things that want to have voice. Right now it happens to be through songs. So like, cool. All right, I'll write some things and record them for people to hear. At a different time in my life, maybe it's going to be like, okay, I really want to pour into directing or this or that, just because it's like, you have different things.
So it's about contributing.
Yeah. Being a valuable partner of the planet.
Yeah. No, truly. We have to think that there is some partnership in society, I think. Yeah. If not, then it negates the responsibility that we actually have to be human and to be alive. Because, I mean, think about even breathing. We take resources to be alive. Yeah. So we have to give something back, to, whether it is other people or it's to the ground that we walk on or something. But like, I've never understood lack of ambition. I am endlessly fascinated by people in general, full stop. Yeah. But when I meet someone who just really is cool, just not, more fascinated by them. I'm like, let me know more of what you're doing, because I'm so interested in what your relationship is to yourself. No shade at all. Yeah. Like, I mean it like genuinely, because I'm addicted to doing, and I need to not be addicted to doing. That's like a forever process of like growing, I guess, in that way. But I love knowing how people within themselves. Yeah. And it's like how someone does do what they do and how they participate and where their brain sits in that and where their heart sits in that.
Yeah. I just think that I'm here, and so many things had to occur for me to be here. Yeah. That I'm like, what are we doing with this? I recently sort of became more aware of my family history. And that was such a profound moment for me because I was like, wow, all of these people existed before me and had to overcome and navigate so much for me to exist at all, let alone like be in a position to chase my dreams, let alone be able to achieve some of those.
Yeah.
That I'm like, oh, like it is actually kind of a slap in the face to those people to just squander it because of whatever the reason is. You know, I'm like, oh, like what a privilege, what a moment I'm in to be able to be like, oh, these generations of people existed and now here I am on Broadway. And like some of them, you know, maybe couldn't even perceive of such a thing. Mm-hmm. Let me contribute my part to the book that is my family. You know, it's like, okay, if this is my chapter, let me fill this thing up. I'm like, okay, like we're doing the Broadway thing, we're releasing music, we're trying to be a good person in the world and pour into the next generation and be personal, but like all of these things. And just like, I guess it kind of ties into this idea of like legacy.
But also just like life is a miracle in general. I genuinely believe that. Yeah. Your conception is a miracle. It really is. Yeah. If you want to look at facts and figures, it is not easy to be here. And it's also to be born into your circumstances. And also all the things that you were given like immediately between birth, like when you are born, everything that you have at that moment, you had zero control over. Yeah. But you do have a responsibility to it, I believe. I like that you said that. For you specifically, and again, you do not have to answer this. It can be saved for the Tony speech. Don't worry. Specifically, who are you, Vincent, doing this for?
My grandpa.
I love that.
Because I think as I got older, I you know, you have those moments where you start thinking more about your life and how you grew up and like how you ended up here and whatever. And I'm like, oh, you know, first of all, I'm named after my grandpa. Reuben Vincent Sims is his name. That's where my first name comes from. But every time we would go to his house, he still to this day has this like massive DVD collection.
Yeah.
Still has DVDs.
Love.
And so every time we would go over to his house, he would play a movie for us, whether that be like a documentary about the relationships between indigenous Americans and black people, or it's like a Denzel Washington movie, just so many different things. And I think that was the initial just like sprinkle of my passion for storytelling. So I'm like, oh, I was seeing a lot of people that looked like me on a screen being funny, being endearing or dramatic or what, just like the whole thing. And I was like, oh, I think some part of me responded to that, even if I wasn't aware. And so I think, I privately have said that, you know, my end goal, like I'm like, if I could do this, like I'd be set for life, is I'm like, oh yeah, if I can make it onto my grandpa's DVD collection, that's it. That's really all I need. Is I'm like, you know, before he leaves this earth, which hopefully is a million years from now. Yes. That I'm like, oh, I want to be able to hand him or mail him a physical copy. Like I'll probably have to specifically request, I need this in a DVD format. But I'm like, I want to give him a copy and be like, hey, this is like, put that on the shelf next to all the others. That's kind of where that started, I think.
My soul is like radiating right now. My grandfather was VHSs for him. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but it was always, I know that visual you're talking about. Yeah. I want my VHS right there next to his, like next to the other ones. But I mean, he legally copied all of them. So it's like anytime I was like in a pageant or I was modeling or like any acting thing I had, he came to every performance and he had a wall that he cut out all the newspaper, like magazine clippings or printed out from his computer. And they were up there. Yeah. You know, but it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, was your grandfather the first one to normalize what it is that you knew in your soul you wanted to do?
I wouldn't say that, just because I'm like, I didn't have the awareness to even know really what it was I was consuming in terms of story. Like, I'm like, I'm just watching, you know, Denzel Washington coach a football team. And I'm like, oh, this is compelling and interesting, you know, but I'm like, I didn't even connect the dots of like, oh, this is something called acting, and like theater is a thing, and that's connected to that. And like I'm like, that was so outside of my awareness. But I'm like, yeah, like when I switched from being an athlete to being a theater dude, I'm like, I feel like transitioned very well. Like I'm like, he was at most of my football and basketball games, and then on a dime was also then at like most of my like performance stuff.
Yeah.
Which was really meaningful for me because he's a dude of a specific time, so he can be very stoic. But it's like, to find out that during my high school performance of Footloose, when I was playing Rin, he cried, and it's like, oh, like, yeah, that's really special to me, and the level of pride that I know that he has. Like when I, booked Lion King and didn't tell them about that, or I got to do like a Good Morning America thing for like this Christmas.
Oh wait, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I tell you that he told 100 people that he knew and had so many people like tuning in, making sure you recorded, and that like was just so like, and I FaceTimed him around that time, and I'm like, I don't know that I've ever seen this man smile that much for that long. And I was just like, oh yeah, like again, going back to that whole idea of like, yeah, I want to be able to hand him a DVD, because he loves movies and loves that, and be like, yeah, like, yeah, you can watch this.
Yeah.
You can sit at home in your big recliner that's way too close to the TV, and you can play this and be like, that's my grandson.
That's gonna happen. Do you feel like there was a moment? Did you always know it was gonna happen? Like, you strike me as someone whose subconscious and conscious are in very good harmony with one another, where it's like, I don't need to give you the data behind it, but it's working.
Yeah.
I'm just doing my thing, which is like a thing people seek after for their entire lives.
Yeah.
It's the work that we're all doing that's the place that we're all trying to get. What was your experience with that? Or what is your experience with that? Was it just like, it's happening? Was there a moment, or you're just like, no, this all makes sense?
At the risk of sounding potentially a little arrogant, I think I had to come to terms with who I am in the space and who I am, and I guess the path that I'm on, the trajectory that I'm on. I think I had to really come to terms with that and accept that and allow that to take its full space. I think for a long time I had been very apprehensive about the idea of success and worried about, I think largely the biggest question was like, is it possible to have the career that I want and also have like a romantic relationship that is,
the life you want.
Yeah, and the life I want. And that was always a battle. And I think I had to allow myself to fully engage with the reality of the path that I feel like I'm on. And then everything else sort of sorted itself out. That I was like, oh, like the minute that I stopped trying to reject the path that was laid ahead of me, I think it opened up that much more. Things got sort of aligned. I try and keep anytime I feel like I'm getting sort of that sounds so woo to say out loud, but like a message, that I try and write that down on like a Post-it note and stick it on the inside of my front door, and less of a way of like, oh, I need to like every day like look at this and read everything and whatever, but more so just to have it in the space and have it sort of
in
my subconscious. That way I'm kind of trying to always keep myself aligned with that road of like, okay, this is how I want to show up in a room. This is the kind of work I want to do, without going so far as to try and control what it looks like, because I think that suggests a sense of self-importance that it's like, oh, I know the best way. I don't. And so I'm releasing myself into what is the version of it that is supposed to be. I don't need to concern myself with like the outcome necessarily. I've recently described it to people as like, it's like a game of Guitar Hero. Where it's like, there's these colored circles, dots, whatever, coming from the distance, from the ether. And it's my responsibility to just stay here, present, ready to receive, and hit the buttons at the right time. That's all I got to do. And will I miss a couple? Sure. But I'm like, the song still goes on. There are more notes to be played. And realistically, I'm like, I'm not a big believer that you actually ever miss anything. I'm like, I think what is for you is always for you. And so that allows me also a level of peace that I'm like, yeah, I can just sit here and play the music as it comes.
Do you think that like trust in that universe and that trust in whatever the connection is and that trust in yourself, basically your intuition? Because to me, it sounds like your superpower. Is that?
I would say so. I mean, I think that looking back over my life that I'm like, oh, there have been several moments that have, been like, there's the fork in the road of you can either go with what your gut is telling you, or you can go with what society would say is the correct decision. I think every time that I have bet on myself or leaned into my intuition, it has always been of benefit to me. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, I think there's only so many times you can do that before you start to distrust that that is the way, at least for you. And when you say that this is something you want, or that this is something you're no longer going to tolerate or accept or whatever, the universe will give you the option to go back on your word. And, I think it's a litmus test. And it's like, okay, like we heard you. Mm-hmm. Are you serious about it?
Yeah.
Because you can have it.
Yes.
If you're serious about it.
I stop people from saying things so frequently. I'm like, careful. Because I know that I'm a powerful being. And if I say that thing, watch it happen. You know what I mean? Just don't even put that out there, kind of a deal. And also to feel comfortable in the uncomfortable. Like, a lot of stuff is changing for me recently in my career and my life. And it feels like when someone asks me how I'm doing now, who knows me well and knows something's a little like askew, I'm like, I'm just generally uncomfortable. And like uncomfortable, like in a good way, where like things are changing. And because I am human, that's uncomfortable. Things are changing for the better, but I'm just generally uncomfortable right now. And that is okay. But because our brains like patterns. So we can self-sabotage, and the old patterns of self-sabotage still exist. So it's like we can fall back into those things very, very easily because our brain is like, oh, we're safe. And it's like, well, we're actually not. Yeah. We're just comfortable. And it's actually about relearning that safety is in the uncomfortable, and safety is change. And you have to rewire your brain to be open to that. Yeah. Because you can't exist otherwise.
Yeah, no. Like I was gonna say that, I feel like oftentimes self-sabotage will mask itself as safety. Mm-hmm. It's like, in the midst of sabotaging ourselves, we'll say, well, the reason why I'm sort of, not cutting myself at the knees with this is because I'm like, well, I don't want to get my hopes up too high, or I don't want to whatever. And so it's like, oh yeah, like that is self-sabotage. You're already anticipating not getting what you want. Mm-hmm. So instead of allowing yourself to fully lean into it, you're, conserving like 15% for just in case it doesn't work out. And then that way I'm assuming that I'm going to be less disappointed.
Well, what? So you don't look stupid in front of yourself? Like, watch me get ready in the morning. Are you kidding me? That's like half of the practice. But I have to change that for myself too, where it's like when I get nervous for things, I'm like, oh my gosh, what if this happens? It's like, okay, first of all, what if that does happen? Oh, do I survive? Okay, cool. Also, what if it just goes really, really well? Can we just like do that? Yeah. I'd rather daydream as opposed to like day nightmare. I got enough of those subconsciously. Like I go to sleep with at night. During the day, I want to anticipate the best thing possible happening because I want to normalize that for myself. I think the best thing possible always does happen when you do live that way, because you don't know why it works out. That's not my business. I don't even know why it worked out that way, but like it did for a reason. And I trust that. I asked someone the other day what their relationship is like with shame, specifically around because it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. And especially when you're in a position where you are willing to put yourself out and to be seen, it's like, what is your relationship with shame? Because we all have things that mortify us, that embarrass us, like the things that we would rather rewrite or edit. How do we grapple with those things and not let them lead us? How do we just let them become more accepting of those things where it's like, yep, that thing was horrible. And like, I wish it didn't happen, or like, I'm embarrassed or anything like that, but it made me who I am now. And I like who I am. And, with like the butterfly wing effect, it's like one thing can change the trajectory of anything else. But I have to accept that did happen.
Yeah.
And I'm here now, and this is awesome.
Yeah.
And we're going forward still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is also like, not to say that we don't take accountability, because it's like, no, both can exist. Like, you can admit that, like, yeah, I was not my best version, my best self in that moment.
Yeah.
And also give yourself enough grace to be like, and whether people accept it or not, or acknowledge it or not, I know that I am not that version anymore.
Yes.
And that's really what you have to lean into to have peace with that part of it, is that it's like, yeah, I know that that's no longer the version that exists. And if people want to meet this new version, that's great. If they don't,
Please.
That's also understandable, whatever. We are humans, and we are story oriented. We like to create stories based off of interactions we have with people, for good or ill. And if you had a bad experience and you choose to take away from that this is who this person is and this is who they're going to be forever, it's like, okay, that's your bag. Yeah, we have to give ourselves the grace to be like, I know I'm not that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to end on this one question, because I'm very curious via our conversation that we've had. So you've done TV. You're going to do film, because it's going to go on a DVD and it's going to your grandfather, Vincent. You've done tons of theater. We've been talking about patterns and like safety and stuff. So you know a track so well for theater. For film, you do maybe a rehearsal, or TV, you do maybe a rehearsal, and you do a couple takes of it depending on the situation. Just talk to me a little bit more about the process, about like the pattern versus the non-pattern, where the pattern, it's like, where does Vincent live in the pattern of the track, where we've done this 300 times now, or, but we're going to do this. Here's maybe one rehearsal. We're going to do 2 takes of this and then move on.
Yeah. I mean, I try my best to keep everything alive always, in that, if that's on stage, it's like, yes, I've done this a million times and whatever, but it's like, we have to cook the meal fresh today.
Oh, yes.
Yes. I mean, I think I'm borrowing from, I think, something Lynn said once before, but today's audience doesn't want the leftovers from yesterday. So
Correct.
Yeah, let's cook it fresh today, and maybe it'll taste a little different. That's okay.
Yeah.
But if your heart's in it, it's still gonna be made with love. And I guess, like, at least the last time I was on set, like, I think I pictured it, because I was still very new to it, that I was like, okay, like, this is a multicam situation. I leaned on what I was more familiar with, was theater. And I was like, okay, if that's getting my close up and that's getting to this and that, I was like, okay, I'm going to look at this like different stages. So I'm like, that's my proscenium, that's my black box theater, that's my whatever. And so it's like, then you just, at least I was trying to give each camera a little something.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, if we're in a black box and I know that I can literally touch the front row, then I'm like, okay, then I'm going to give a couple smaller, more nuanced, more like quick things that like they're going to pick up. If I'm going to proscenium, I need to project it a little bit further without becoming inauthentic or inhuman. And so it's like, okay, I push a couple of moments here and there to give to them. And maybe you split that up between takes or whatever it is. But yeah, that was kind of the way I looked at it. Just because I was like, in this short burst of like, okay, quick rehearsal and like, here we go. I was like, how do I just codify this in a way that allows me to execute effectively, like quickly? Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And I also thank you for that. And thank you, Lynn, for that. Because I hate leftovers.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I despise leftovers. It's a thing in my brain when someone's like, do you want to take it home? I'm like, I just want to order what I'm going to eat now, because old food weirds me out. And I wish I wasn't like that wasteful person, but it's not for me. It's so not. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
You're awesome.
Thanks. So are you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I hope we have you back on the podcast soon.
Yeah.
And that's the latest. I'm honored to have been part of your thinking sphere today. Feel free to share, like, and subscribe on this platform or follow and participate on any of my social media platforms. If this practice intrigues you as much as it does me, then join us in the Me3 community, where we will work directly and you will curate a mindful method of thinking to define your own creative conscious. Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Authenticated. I love that you're here.